Hi, this is Ancient History and Medieval History for Monday, April 26, 2021. What we did last week and the week before is we talked about the three lights of civilization in the in the Dark Ages. Assuming the darkness is the fall of the knowledge of skills and lore in a civilized place, descending into barbarism. The lights of civilization that linger on are the Byzantine Empire, the Christian Church, and the um, Islamic Arabs. We talked extensively about all three. Now, today, we're going to veer into Dark Age Europe itself. But I guess I am going to tell you how eventually that knowledge is going to come back to Europe. And it's not going to be during the Dark Ages. The only knowledge that's in Europe during the Dark Ages of the Greco-Roman world, other than the physical ruins in the shadows of which people live their lives, is the church, and they're keeping that knowledge alive in seed form. So Europeans are going to acquire or reacquire the ancient knowledge through a few processes. In the High Middle Ages, there is the counter reaction to being on the receiving end of Islamic holy war for about 500 years. Let's see, about 400 years. 400 years of being on the receiving end of Islamic holy war. The Christians decide to develop their own form of holy war, not jihad, but crusade. And when the Crusaders go to the Holy Land in the High Middle Ages, they spend some time. They're there for about 100 years at most, and they lose and get kicked out. While they're there, they sample the high life. What it's like to eat food with spices, what it's like to get medicated by people who have other ideas than leechcraft, what it's like to wear silk underwear or cotton rather than linen or wool underwear and clothing. And what it's like to have libraries and cleanliness and baths and hot baths and all sorts of stuff like that. So the Crusaders are going to come back, and they're going to want some of this stuff back in their homelands. Also, in Spain and Portugal, the Christians, as they march south during their Reconquista in the High and Late Middle Ages, are going to conquer intact a bunch of Islamic cities. So they're also going to learn what it feels like to eat spicy foods and wear comfortable clothing and let's see, have medical care that isn't just completely horrifically scary. Both of so Spain is going to develop more quickly than anyone else because they get this knowledge. Also, in Eastern Europe, after the Middle Ages, in early modern times, the Turks advance all the way to the heart of Europe, to Vienna. That's a lot of European territory. So when you're fighting somebody, you're intimate with them. When you're physically fighting someone, you smell their bad breath. You smell their sweat. They smell yours. Why? It's a stressful moment. You're face to face. Boom, boom, boom. That's the sound you make when you fight. I looked it up. So there is intimate contact between Christians of Europe and the Ottoman Turks, and that's also going to pass some knowledge. What's ultimately going to happen is the Europeans who want this knowledge in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance are going to trade by sea from northern Italy to Egypt and Syria to get that ancient knowledge and to get those luxury goods. And in trade, they're going to exchange knowledge and information, and it's going to be passed into Europe. The whole idea of Renaissance, which is at the end of our story this year, is Europe reacquires what it had lost, which is its own memory. It's like an Alzheimer's victim or an amnesia victim suddenly being reacquainted with their old life. But in the meantime, for a number of years, they've led a new life. They have a new personality. So what they have to do is they have to contend with how does the memories of the original life, how is that going to be folded into this new life that you've built, this new personality? Are you going to just go back to the old person, or are you going to make a hybrid of yourself? Or are you going to have a completely new start? What does it mean? So in the 1400s and 1500s, when the Europeans, thanks to trade, warfare, crusades, and reconquista, get a hold of this ancient knowledge again, They are reacquainted with their pre-Christian selves, their Roman and Greek selves and stuff like that. But they've been 1,000 years as Christians in Christendom. How is that going to play out? And we'll study part of it this year and part of it next year. That's sort of where we're going. So, any thoughts on the lights of civilization before we delve into the dark? Ooh, scary. Okay. Birth of our Western civilization. The Greeks are like us, they're not us. The Romans are like us, they're not us. The Egyptians or Babylonians are kind of like us, but they're not really like us like the Greeks and Romans are. The early Christians under Rome are very much like us, but they're not us. And the Germanic barbarians, the horse-riding biker gangs that conquer the Western Roman Empire, they're like us, but they're not us. We, us, ourselves, our own Western civilization, our own Judeo-Christian Western civilization is born, hello gravity, it is born in the Dark Ages of Western Europe after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And its baby name for the first 1,000 years is Christendom. That's what we call ourselves. Is Christendom a kingdom? No, it's not. It is that region of the world where the Western Christian Church holds sway. And in that region, there are many kingdoms. There is an empire. Eventually, there are all sorts of things, places, governments, ideas. But what holds them together is their common Christianity. And the ante that you pay, the price that you pay for becoming a part of our Western civilization is that you become Christian. Without that, you're not accepted into the club. With that, you are, but you change. I don't know if any of you remember, at Christmas time, they used to broadcast, and I think they still do, the question is, did you even hear about it? A bunch of Christmas specials with these little puppet things. They had one about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer with the heat miser and the cold miser. And my favorite growing up was Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And yes, I'm telling you about a children's special.
Actually, the stop motion.
Okay, good. Yes, you know it then. In Santa Claus is Coming to Town, a stop-motion sort of puppet show, you've got a bunch of characters who need to deliver the Christmas toys, but they have to cross the scary mountain of the Winter Warlock. And it ain't called the Scary Mountain of the Winter Warlock for nothing. He commands lightning and thunder, blizzards and ice storms, and he has a terrible temper. And the Winter Warlock is going to punish, maybe even kill, anyone who crosses his mountain. So young Kris Kringle, when he was still a man before he became Santa Claus, has a sleigh full of toys that he's bringing across the mountain, and he gets attacked by the Winter Warlock and his horrible, weird weather. Eventually, and I'm not going to give the details because honestly I don't remember them, the Winter Warlock is persuaded that maybe being an evil person is wrong. And maybe being nice has its points. And maybe the Christmas spirit is about taking that anger and coldness and darkness inside of you and warming it up with affection, friendship, even love. And he changes. He gets a name, yes.
Kris Kringle gives the Warlock a little toy train. And he's like, oh my god. I've never gotten anything before.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad. I really am. Because a bunch of memories from my childhood have just come back thanks to you.
Think they show some of
That's delightful. Yeah. I'd scare you too if I did. The idea is, okay, Ella just pointed out, Kris Kringle gave him a toy, said, this is for you. It was a little toy train, yes. And it melts his heart. And he becomes a nice guy. But when he becomes a nice guy, he loses all his evil magic powers. So One of the reason I'm talking about this is that when the scary, hairy barbarians that have come into Europe, like the Lombards or the Magyars or the Vikings, when they want to join Western civilization, they have to give up their paganism and become Christians. And when they do that, they become nicer. And in becoming nicer, they lose that edge that made them so scary in the first place. One of the most peaceful places on earth after Christianization is Scandinavia. Scandinavians have a few wars over the last 1,000 years, but compared to the rest of Europe, it's practically peaceful. It's like an island of peace in a sea of war most of the time. Well, that is one of the effects of Christianity. So, to join the club of Christendom, you have to give up that scariness to an extent. Not all of it, but some of it, to become a Christian. In other words, stop living like a wolf and start living like a sheep. That's a hard sell, by the way, especially for men who understand how dangerous the world is. Not can be, is. Because if you're weak, you get attacked. It's unfortunate but true. So, we're talking about our civilization, whose childhood name is Christendom. And then in modern times, we grow up to become our actual selves. So, let's start the story. I'm going to step out just to make sure those people are not in the wrong place. I don't mind speaking with music in the background. I even kind of like it. Okay, they're not. They're fine. So, in Western Europe, after the fall of Rome, there are a bunch of tribal regions. And we've gone over those. The Visigoths in Spain, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Vandals in Africa, the Franks in France, the Lombards come into northern Italy after the Ostrogoths fall. And you've got all these different tribal regions. But they're not unified kingdoms, not by a long shot. They're pretty wild places. And in this wild anarchy, you have a series of base cultures that are going to end up blending with one another. At the bottom, you've got the Romanized lower class, the peasantry. Now, by this point, Romanization has worked so well. These people don't think of themselves as Gauls anymore. They think of themselves as Romans. These people don't think of themselves as Celtiberians anymore. They think of themselves as Romans. The Britons don't think of themselves as anti-Roman blue painted Celts anymore. They're Romans. And the same is true of the Carthaginians. They're not Carthaginians anymore. They're Romans. And when they get conquered, one of the amazing things is how many of the conquered there are and how few conquerors there are. I'll say that again because I said it sort of confusingly. How many conquered people? The vast majority of the population of Western Europe are Romanized lower class citizens. They become lower class because the barbarians come in and say, "You got to work for me now." And the only answer is yes or swipe. And swipe isn't a fun answer, is it? Well, you can ask your head, but it's over there. And what are you going to ask with? Your neck? It's not a good day. So, the vast majority of people, we're talking 70, 80, 90% of the people, actually closer to 90, in all of these countries are former Romans. How can you have 5,000 or 10,000 barbarians take over a Romanized population in a place like Gaul, France? How can you have 5 to 10,000 barbarians take over an area with hundreds of thousands? It doesn't make sense, does it? If you just look at the numbers.
I mean, by this time, how does this one already city? They kind of already people are looking here, and so the barbarians come and said, "Hi, we're gonna tell you to do this and this and this." So people are like, "Okay." I mean, if there's something to do, then I'll do it.
They're used to following orders. That's part of it. The Romans, thank you. The Romans have gotten used to following the orders of the empire. Remember, the last 2 centuries of the empire were the dominate. These aren't Romans that think of themselves as free people. These aren't the Romans of Scipio and of the foundation of the Republic. These are Romans who were ruled by an increasingly dominating, involving, intrusive empire, and they were used to following orders. And one of those orders was that most of them were not allowed to become fighting men. You'd have the field armies, which were relatively small compared to the population, and they were Rome's real striking force, but there were only 4 of them. And then you had a bunch of people who, if there was a problem, would get behind a wall and pick up a spear and say, "You don't come near me." Sorry, this won't work without the prop. You don't come near me. See, that's so much better because I've got the spear, and I'll pour hot oil down on you. I mean, you're on a wall. The problem with being on a wall is they invented ladders a long time ago. And the enemy can bring ladders up, and if they're vicious enough and aggressive enough, they'll push you back, and they'll climb the wall. And then you're going to die, or be enslaved, or at the very least get the stuffing kicked out of you because you said, "Get back!" and looked like an idiot. These guys are really good at violence. In Star Trek, the original series, there's an old Klingon expression. A running man can cut 1,000 throats in one night. Now, of course, those throats have to be stupid enough to be on people that stand there waiting for their turn to come as the guy runs by and goes, "Slice." But it deals with the reality. Throughout history, again and again, fairly small groups of really violent people take over fairly large groups of peaceful people. The wolves and the sheep. And this is just something you got to understand. The wolves in this case are the barbarians, the Germanic barbarians, the Franks, the Burgundians, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, and so forth, the Lombards. And the sheep are the formerly Roman population. And the Romans, for the most part, are peaceful because they've been Christianized. And Christianity tends to make people less warlike. Not always, but it tends to. And they've gotten used to following orders, as Ari says. So, later in history, the British had an army of maybe 100,000 people in India. And British India included today's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and it even included, to some extent, Burma, what the military calls Myanmar. 100,000 soldiers. There were tens of millions of Indians controlled by 100,000 Brits. Why? Well, the Brits had gunpowder, but the Brits were also very good at violence at that time. And so the Indians ended up being under British rule for hundreds of years. It's not always numbers that wins a fight. You look at any playground. How many bullies are there? Usually one, maybe a couple. And if there are a couple, they got to work out who's the chief bully. But once they work that out, "I'm the chief bully." "Oh, yes, boss, you're the chief bully. You're so tough." "Shut up." "Okay, boss." Once you work out who the chief bully is, that's always how they sound. I looked that up too. Once you work that out, you got one guy terrorizing a dozen kids, more than a dozen kids. "Give me your lunch money." "Okay. Otherwise, I'll hit you." "Fine, just don't hit me." If the dozen or so people that the bully was being a jerk to looked at each other and said, "Enough of this," and pigpiled on the bully and started swinging, the bully's days would be numbered. That never happens, or it almost never happens, because the bully is naturally aggressive. And those other kids that are being bullied are not. Aggression has a place in the world. That's why sheep are better off when they're with sheepdogs. And the sheepdog is the protector, the soldier, the policeman. And what the police do, what the sheepdogs do, is they use their talent for aggression to test or to protect the sheep from the wolves. I think I've played for you a clip that dealt with this. But I suppose what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the control and I'll take a chance and see if we can actually get some video on this. And I will stop the thing when I find what I'm looking for. Would people please shut the fan off, close the shades, and turn the lights off? And I'll get back to you at home later.